Hello everybody, thank you for being so patient whilst we overcome the usual technical glitches. It's always fun when you stand in front of people and things don't work. That's my experience.
Yeah, that was like power was not there in the computer. But today's presentation is quite interesting and important for us. So the day I joined, and after that when Steve formally joined, and then we had this discussion that we need to have some protocols of e-learning policies. And then when we started thinking about that, there are lots of other things came up. And then today our presentation is about that, basically. So, so how that e-learning policy will support transformative pedagogies. So yeah, Steve, you would like to add something?
Yes, I think before we sort of go into some of the thoughts and ideas, what I'd like to say is that on reflection this morning, which is usually during my time I have a shower, I might say, which is usually my best periods of reflection for the beginning of the day, whilst I was just getting out of sleep. I think what we're actually talking about is an evolution of curriculum design and thinking, which I believe is no less greater than that of the paradigm shift felt by world civilization during the 18th century Enlightenment movement in Europe. We could say, I think, that we might be starting a journey whereby we're engaging in a form of what I'd like to call curriculum enlightenment. Mita.
So, we started with the transmission mode, and then transaction, and then now it is transformative. So what are the different things which, everybody knows, but anyway, just I'm putting that was only from teacher-directed. Now there was transaction mode where the student and the context, what was the input, what students' level and all this were tested, and then went from there, and then measurements of learning were also done. So we are in between this transaction and transformative mode. So there is a pedagogical shift which is needed, because changing our education from transmission through to transaction and then to transformative mode, which will need paradigm shift in epistemological and core psychological assumptions of how people learn. Each relates to different theories and different teaching models also. And here, pedagogy, andragogy, and hoitagogy is that I knew self-determined learning, self-regulated learning, but Steve introduced me to this term, but which is what we are moving towards when it is transformative education is more of personalized learning, self-determined, and the students will have to be thinking about lifelong learners, and they have to work towards that. They have to be independent learners and learn how to learn. Basically, those are the skills, research skills, as this morning we saw, those are the things we need. And reflective skills, that what they have done, if they have done rightly or not. So, and then what can they do better? Because there will be no evaluator or teacher to assess. When they, for us, we train teachers, and then they have to learn to evaluate others, and as well as later they have to evaluate on their own teaching. So these are some of the things which has been being trialed of, and a flipped classroom is also in USP. Some faculties are doing that. Then e-portfolios I have been doing for last 10 years, and it has moved from different stages, and now it is more of a reflective and learning towards lifelong learners. And there are amazing stories that I had from e-portfolios that students changed their profession, then they decided that they want to do research. So those are the things which come up when you see your own learning journey. Then already in USP, this open and flexible learning framework is being developed, and I think there will be, at one stage, it will be USP's teaching learning policy will be there. So where this e-learning policy fits in. So this is e-learning policy fits in here because the core is open and flexible learning framework, and this is a bottom-up approach, and then we'll cover everything with the USP teaching learning policy. Now, for transformative learning environment, there are complex pedagogical processes. So there is a deficit of quality research on this. And then we want to embed in how e-learning policy will be able to support this kind of learning environments. No?
Yes, I mean, looking at the fundamental sort of key issue here is actually how we, as the box says quite clearly, how do we actually sort of integrate core skills and teacher dispositions? It's one thing to have a skill, it's another thing to have a disposition towards doing something. And basically what we're talking about is shifting our thinking towards what we commonly understand as a student-centred learning environment. My experience in the past 20 years is there's been an awful lot of talk the talk, but very little walk the walk. That's my observation, and I wasn't talking about Fiji and here, although I could have been. I'm talking about back in the UK, US and elsewhere. There have been lots of movements. There have been some very useful, I suppose, first steps, but these are very tentative, very nervous. For example, all assessment systems are still very firmly, in a different kind of paradigm to the kind of things that we're talking about here. That sort of middle box at the bottom there, we feel that what we're trying to embed is critical and creative reflective thinking, which requires two kinds of prerequisites. Students, indeed all of us, need to be self-organised learners, and from that we can be self-regulated learners. Mita was talking about learning to learn skills, but this is an essential prerequisite, because without that you can't actually design and implement student-centred learning environments. So this is absolutely important. Sustainable learning strategies, we feel that at the moment we're at the kind of cutting edge, but we're also scratching the surface, because we know that in reality in our hearts this doesn't properly exist at the present. So we're actually asking this inquiry question, what really are they? What are they? How do we actually define, design and implement a sustainable learning strategy that then is transferable to people's entire conscious lives? That is what lifelong learning is about, in our opinion. So, moving on, what we're sort of looking at are transformative pedagogies. And in fact, from what we said earlier, we could argue that the same in terms of adult education, transformative andragogies, and also in terms of self-determined learning, transformative hoitagogies, or in some way the integration of all three in terms of our assumptions for learning and teaching. Strategies of instruction, organisational support systems need to be there. What is the shift and leap of all of these things? We also need to look at how we actually manage stuff. How do we manage sustainable pedagogical transformations linked to learner activities? And at the heart of every education system that usually scuppers stuff, in my experience, is assessment. The assumptions, both ontological and epistemological, surrounding assessment has to be the lead. At the moment, it is assessment systems that represents the weakest link in realising the kind of educational policies that we wish to implement. So actually, you can't actually do this stuff without reforming the assessment system in tandem with the other sort of ideas that we've been referring to in terms of student-centred learning. So what are, for example, constructivist assessment systems that can be formalised and actually provide the basis of measurements of achievement? This is actually a very difficult question, I can assure you, not a simple question. We've seen some interesting presentations today that have started to move in that direction, I believe, from what we've seen earlier.
So, coming to that basic question that we were thinking of e-learning policy and strategies, which will then let us do like innovative and informative, actually, teaching learning policy, and also change our teaching learning. And assessment is one of the major things, because processes has to be recorded, has to be evaluated. It's not the product, it's also the process. So how do we do that? And So to have this sustainable and innovative teaching learning policy, we really have to work on the e-learning policies and strategies, and also the whole curriculum changes and how that affects everything. Now, again, we are talking about paradigm shift and organization planning and cultural approaches towards education. So also we have to think about that what suits us, not that what others have done. But we can learn from that, but then we have to adapt those according to our needs. So the next, what we're thinking of, that how it could be done, it's like there are three things like individual stakeholders group, as I have noted under this group is faculty, schools, groups, teams, individuals, and then USP as the organization. So where do we start? So then we had a good thought on that, and then we moved forward and see.
Yeah, so I think this is the next slide here, isn't it? Yeah, next one.
It's not working.
It's working.
Yeah.
It works. Right, so basically, building upon this sort of structures, at the end of the day, there are things we can do in terms of designing our individual, sort of teaching units, exit awards, and all the rest of it. But, as a sort of university organisation, we have to look to the kind of structures we work within. In a way, if you like, reserve the right to deconstruct and reconstruct, what we live and work in. That kind of critiquing in a very constructive manner. So, for example, what do we do as individuals? How do we operate with other members of staff, in our particular schools, faculties? How do we actually organise, huge entities called schools in terms of, all the various programs that operate within them in order to do the best in terms of, curriculum design and organisation? Because these things matter, because in many ways the structures represent the, learning support services and represents an organism in its own right. So if it's not proper, it's not going to be fit for purpose, and that would actually impact, I believe, and Mita believes as well, on what we try to do and achieve. So that's where we've got there. I suppose, in summary, for this, what we're really saying is how do we best organise learning support services and networks to support the new open and flexible learning policy, and perhaps this could be seen as part of a new open access curriculum. So the idea that open and flexible learning is actually a new kind of open access curriculum in terms of our kind of language and think set. So if we move on.
Yeah, these are some of the initiatives that we have started with, and first thing we thought that we should be designing the website of our school, and then e-portal that Ian has been working on, and then we thought it can reach masses and we can have more in that. And then smart classroom, and then we came up with the idea of smart pedagogy and smart assessment related to that. And M-learning, I'm trying to start another project on mobile devices with iPads next semester, which will have learning effectiveness measured, not only push and pull information.
Okay, and that takes us to where we work and live at the moment, which is the School of Education inside the faculty, as we are. One of the first things that I suppose confused me working in School of Education, especially as I accepted the title as head of the School of Education, was how on earth is it organised? Being naive sometimes is an advantage because it gives you the chance to actually have deeper insights than if you're actually sort of embedded in something for years and years. Basically, in order to achieve these kinds of ideas across the curriculum, our feeling was not to just leave this to the devices of individual sort of faculty, staff members and just sort of hope for potluck, so as to speak. So we've actually reconceptualised, reorganised, and through dialogue and negotiation, I wanted to look at the existing divisions or pillars, as they were called, and say, well, were they fit for purpose? Or, is there anything missing, or can we enhance it in any particular way? And after, discussion over the last 6 to 7 weeks, I might say, with all of my school, sort of academic members of staff and even administrators as well, we've come up with this new evolutionary structure that's even changed as the Vice Chancellor's chatted to me about this and that, and other people tell me other stuff. And the current state of play in this non-concrete structure is that you'll see that we've actually put, apart from all these other sort of areas of our particular curriculum, we've actually got an exclusive group, and these are referred to as curriculum and research groups, so that we can integrate the two things together. We've integrated e-learning with learning and knowledge sciences and curriculum design and technology, and there'll be two purposes there. One is that people in this group will actually be there to support all the other groups, and in fact not just the other groups, but maybe even outside of the school, the faculty and the rest of the university if we get it right. But also at the same time there's actually a discrete curriculum. For example, we have no Exeter Award qualifications in educational technology or things like that. So we need to almost design and invent those missing bits of curriculum from scratch, but we'd like to do it properly. But we're also offering a service, at least in the first instance, to the rest of our school, and then we want to go outside of those boundaries and work across other areas of the faculty and university. So that's roughly where we got to there.
Yeah, but maybe you can add about partnership.
Yeah. I mean, basically, what we're talking about here is also developing partnerships, inside the school, across the faculty, but also another important area that we've actually identified is that within the sort of TVET curriculum, we noticed that we had one particular unit called Practicum, which is an academically assessed unit, but is actually a vocational unit linked to teaching licenses. We also are running something called Library and Information Studies, which is also a license to be librarian around the region. So we've actually put professional licenses and partnerships into a discrete group as well. So basically what we're talking about, we've sort of really put down a kind of what we'd like to call a kind of social manifesto for organisational change. We think it should be across the whole university, but we're going to sort of apply it to our own patch in the first instance, in order that we've got sort of worked examples of what we're talking about, so that we mean what we say and we'll say what we mean, to quote a phrase. So basically we want to evaluate the kind of curriculum that we actually engage in and make sure it's fit for purpose is the first thing. We want to utterly rethink formative assessment, and formative assessment has been a key issue discussed over this last 2 days, I might say. It's cropped up in all sorts of presentations, and people have asked some deep questions about it, and I'm really pleased. But actually, we feel that there's a relationship between formative assessment and integrated assessment tasks, so that we actually have activities linked to reflection. And by the way, we mean academic reflection and evidence through e-portfolios as one type of schema for such practical assessments. So that marrying of those things together. We also feel that e-learning is actually an important tool as well as process to support these activities. So therefore, how can we totally integrate e-learning with e-assessment systems that support the previous thing that we were talking about in terms of formative assessment? Can we actually sort of introduce higher order constructivist teaching and learning approaches through smart e-learning, e-assessment systems, rather than the kind of low-level stuff that we might be more used to? We also believe utterly that we need to rethink all organisational learning support structures, and by that we actually mean everything. It should be root and branch, without fear, and in that way maybe a paradigm shift towards a kind of flip USP. So rather than a flip classroom, maybe we need a flip USP. So nobody can hide in a shell. Even human resources are there at the end of the day, actually affect the quality of what students might experience, and also how we do our jobs. We see ourselves as part of a team. So for example, teamwork would involve the fact that at some of our meetings we're starting to now invite people from other areas of professional services to help us think through problems. So people from student SAS, people from human resources to talk about how we structure our department. Can they help us to make this fit within the systems of USP, or to help us to innovate USP? So we don't see this in isolation as academic teams, but basically The last point, as one of the models, we want to actually look at this new curriculum research group, which e-learning is part of, and actually look at some new, Flexi Awards in our postgraduate portfolio in terms of the learning sciences and knowledge technology. And we want to link that to accredited professional development. In addition, we've also been tasked from the other week at the sort of Centre for Flexible Learning, SMT, to look at the tertiary teaching qualification, which is offered across the university, but also to other HE partners, FNU and other people across the region. And we would like to completely deconstruct and reconstruct that programme and validate it as a professional learning and higher education set of awards. I'm going to stop just there.
Yeah, next is we'd like you to invite your thoughts and remarks.